Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes the axis of resistance pushing U.S. to ramp up Middle East defenses. Gaza war pushes tumultuous Israel-Turkey ties into deep freezer. From the river to the sea, why a Palestinian rallying cry ignites dispute. U.S. and Iran-backed groups trade fire in Syria. Will it get worse? A mission to save Gaza from a humanitarian crisis is unraveling. The axis of resistance pushing U.S. to ramp up Middle East defenses. Financial Times. The U.S. has deployed military assets to the Middle East to bolster regional deterrence efforts following the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas. The U.S. has sent a carrier strike group to the eastern Mediterranean, along with additional fighter jets and troops. This move comes amid concerns that the conflict between Israel and Hamas could escalate into a broader conflict involving Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed Lebanese militant group. Hezbollah has warned that it has upgraded its attacks and diversified its targets inside Israel. The U.S. is also concerned about escalating attacks on its troops and personnel from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, as well as attacks on Israel from Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Houthi rebels in Yemen. The U.S. has sent additional troops, air defense systems, and naval assets to the region to bolster the protection of American forces and deter Iran and its militant proxies. The recent conflict between Israel and Hamas has highlighted the risks of a broader regional conflict involving multiple militant groups supported by Iran. The U.S. is concerned that the conflict between Israel and Hamas could spill over into a larger conflict involving Hezbollah and other groups in Lebanon. There are already ongoing clashes between Israeli forces and Hezbollah, as well as Palestinian militants in Lebanon. The fear is that a miscalculation by either side could escalate the situation further. In addition to the threat from Hezbollah, the U.S. is also concerned about escalating attacks on its troops and personnel from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. These militias have claimed responsibility for dozens of attacks on U.S. forces in the region since October. The U.S. has sent additional troops, air defense systems, and naval assets to the region to bolster its presence and deter further attacks. Gaza war pushes tumultuous Israel-Turkey ties into deep freezer. Al Jazeera. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has severed ties with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over Israel's ongoing military offensive in Gaza. In a series of increasingly direct comments, Erdogan has referred to Israel as a war criminal and accused it of committing genocide in Gaza. Turkey's foreign ministry has recalled its ambassador to Tel Aviv over Israel's refusal to accept a ceasefire and its attacks on civilians. The strain marks a sharp deterioration in relations between the two countries. Trade between them has fallen by 50% since October 7. The relationship between Turkey and Israel has been characterized by warmer ties since Israel's formation in 1948, with Turkey being the first Muslim-majority country to recognize Israel's sovereignty. Turkey has been consistent in its support for Palestinian self-determination. However, the relationship has also been marked by periods of tension, and the current deterioration is not the first. The two countries have managed to maintain trade links despite these diplomatic tensions. From the river to the sea, why a Palestinian rallying cry ignites dispute. Washington Post. The phrase "from the river to the sea" has gained attention during the recent conflict between Israel and Palestine. Activists and pro-Palestinian demonstrators have used the phrase to express support for Gaza and Palestinians in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. However, critics, including some Jewish American organizations, argue that the phrase is anti-Semitic and a call to eradicate Israel. The controversy surrounding the slogan has led to accusations of silencing dissent over Israel's actions in Gaza. The slogan gained traction in the 1960s among Palestinian activists and intellectuals who had become refugees during the 1948 war. It was developed as a call for a secular, democratic, free Palestine and has been used by various Palestinian factions over the years. To many Palestinians and their supporters, the phrase represents a call for peace and an end to the Israeli occupation. However, many Jews, Jewish organizations, and advocates for Israel view the slogan as anti-Semitic. They believe that it denies the Jewish right to self-determination and calls for the removal of Jews from their ancestral homeland. The phrase is seen by some as a threat to the existence of Israel and evokes memories of the Holocaust. Authorities in Vienna and Berlin have banned protests that use the slogan, and the British Home Secretary has suggested that its use could be a criminal offense. The controversy surrounding the phrase reflects the deep divisions and tensions between Israelis and Palestinians, as well as the ongoing debate over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. While some view the slogan as a call for peace and justice, others see it as a call for the destruction of Israel. It is a highly charged and emotive slogan that encapsulates the complexities and challenges of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. US and Iran-backed groups trade fire in Syria. Will it get worse? Al Jazeera. Iran-backed armed groups in the Middle East have been attacking US forces in Syria and Iraq more than 50 times since Israel launched its brutal military assault on the Gaza Strip on October 7. The attacks, which have involved rockets, missiles, and drones, have caused minor damage but have not resulted in any US casualties. The US has responded with retaliatory strikes, targeting sites in Syria that are allegedly linked to Iran. US officials have claimed that the attacks are acts of self-defense and are not directly related to the conflict in Gaza. However, analysts suggest that Iran and its allies are trying to pressure the US to change its approach to the Gaza war by increasing costs and indirectly pressuring Israel to stop its attacks. The attacks on US forces in Syria have not caused serious damage or resulted in US casualties, but there is a risk of miscalculation that could lead to an escalation of the conflict. A mission to save Gaza from a humanitarian crisis is unraveling. Wall Street Journal. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, says its ability to cope with the Israeli-Hamas conflict in Gaza is being severely tested, with more than 100 of its workers killed and supplies cut off by an Israeli blockade. On Tuesday, a UN spokesperson said that the lack of fuel meant that the agency's functions would start gradually collapsing as ambulances, sewage and sanitation systems shut down. More than 66 people sheltering in UN compounds have been killed and over 550 others injured. The UN says that at least 183 of its schools in Gaza are being used as shelters. Since the Israeli military campaign began, more than 750,000 people have taken shelter in UNRWA schools, with the average number of people per shelter now over 6,250, 9 times higher than the intended capacity. The Israeli government accuses UNRWA of employing Hamas militants, an allegation that the agency denies. A third round of U.S. sanctions against Hamas focuses on the money transfers from Iran to Gaza. Associated Press. The U.S. has introduced a third round of sanctions against a group of Hamas officials, members of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and a Lebanese money exchange service. The sanctions aim to prevent the targeted people and companies from doing business with Americans and block access to U.S. property and bank accounts. This comes in response to the surprise attack by Hamas on Israel on October 7, which resulted in roughly 1,200 deaths or kidnappings. The Treasury Department said these sanctions are aimed at protecting the international financial system from abuse by Hamas militants and their enablers. Unverified rumors of Russia arming Hamas persist as war rages in Gaza. Al Jazeera. Ukrainian officials have accused Russia of supplying weapons to Hamas, following an attack by the Palestinian group on Israel in early October. However, experts have said that there is no concrete proof of Russian arms supplies to Hamas. Russian-American security expert Vera Mironova has claimed that a former U.S. senior security official is preparing to release a report on the alleged link between the Hamas attack and Russia. Mironova alleges that Russia supplied arms to Hamas via Iran and Syria to distance itself from the conflict. She also claims that Iran is providing Russia with cheap kamikaze drones. Last month, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev suggested that NATO arms sent to Ukraine ended up in the hands of Hamas fighters. Russia has a long history of relations with Hamas, stretching back to the Soviet era. How can Cyprus exploit its gas in a geopolitical minefield? Deutsche Welle. Cyprus offshore gas deposits have the potential to increase prosperity in the region and help de-escalate the ongoing conflict between Turkey and Greece over the island, according to Middle East expert Cosmi Ojeda. The gas fields could reduce the importance of other gas suppliers and dependencies on countries such as Qatar, said Ali Rettig, head of the energy division at Israel's Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. However, the recent war between Israel and Hamas has put plans for cooperation on hold. Negotiations must also involve Turkey, which has claimed the natural resources off the island's coast since 1974. The ghosts of Lebanon. Foreign Affairs. The ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine in Gaza is reminiscent of Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982. The invasion of Lebanon began after a Palestinian attack and Israel's leaders responded with a maximalist military response, just as they have done in Gaza. The fighting in both cases has taken place in densely populated urban areas, resulting in a high number of civilian casualties. Israel's use of disproportionate force in both conflicts has failed to eliminate Palestinian militant groups and has only led to further violence and instability. The similarities between the conflicts in Lebanon and Gaza are concerning. Israel's war in Lebanon resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians, the fragmentation of Palestinian groups, and the rise of Hezbollah. The current conflict in Gaza is likely to have similarly disastrous consequences. Israel's military superiority will not be enough to defeat Hamas or Islamic Jihad, and the groups will likely re-emerge in new forms. There is no military solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and a ceasefire is the only morally defensible and politically reasonable course of action. The international community, particularly the United States, must pressure Israel to halt the violence and seek a peaceful resolution. The U.S. has successfully influenced Israeli behavior in the past, and President Biden should follow the example set by Ronald Reagan during the Lebanon War. A ceasefire is in the best interest of both Israelis and Palestinians, and continued military action will only result in further suffering and instability. It is time to break the cycle of violence and work towards a just and lasting peace. Israel dominates battlefield with technological advantage over Hamas. Wall Street Journal. The Israeli military has made significant use of technology to carry out its offensive against Hamas in Gaza. Real-time data from drones, jet fighters, naval ships, tanks, and soldiers is being used by commanders to monitor the movement of Israeli and Palestinian forces inside Gaza. This information is then used to move troops, weapons, and surveillance aircraft, allowing the Israeli military to carry out a takeover of Hamas's stronghold in Gaza City with minimal casualties. The military hopes to focus on destroying Hamas's underground network of tunnels and its leadership in the coming weeks. The offensive has faced criticism due to the high number of civilian casualties and the destruction of infrastructure in Gaza City. The Al-Shifa hospital, which Israel claims is being used by Hamas as a headquarters, has been particularly affected. President Biden and UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak have called on Israel to minimize civilian casualties. The Israeli military says it has plotted a safe corridor for people to leave the hospital and is transferring incubators from hospitals in Israel to help with the needs of the pediatric ward. However, doctors at the hospital have described a chaotic situation with gunfire and bombs going off around the facility and a lack of necessary supplies. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world. Today, we have delved into the latest developments in the Middle East, focusing on the conflict between Israel and Hamas. We have explored the implications of this conflict on various regional actors and the international community, as well as the ongoing debate surrounding it. Firstly, the U.S. has deployed military assets to the region to bolster deterrence efforts. They are concerned about the potential escalation of the conflict, particularly with the involvement of Hezbollah and Iranian-backed militias. This highlights the risks of a broader regional conflict involving multiple militant groups supported by Iran. Secondly, Turkish President Erdogan has severed ties with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. This marks a sharp deterioration in relations between the two countries, which have had a complex history of both cooperation and tension. Next, we discuss the controversy surrounding the phrase "from the river to the sea," which has been used by activists and pro-Palestinian demonstrators. While some view it as a call for peace and justice, critics argue that it is anti-Semitic and a call to eradicate Israel. This controversy reflects the deep divisions and tensions between Israelis and Palestinians. We also touched upon the attacks on U.S. forces in Syria and Iraq by Iran-backed militias, which some experts believe are aimed at pressuring the U.S. to change its approach to the Gaza conflict. While these attacks have not caused serious damage or casualties, there is a risk of miscalculation and escalation. Furthermore, we discussed the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, and its struggle to cope with the conflict in Gaza. The agency's functions are being severely tested, with its workers being killed and supplies cut off by the Israeli blockade. The situation is dire, with ambulances and sanitation systems shutting down. Moving on, we mentioned the U.S. imposing sanctions on Hamas officials, Palestinian Islamic Jihad members, and a Lebanese money exchange service. These sanctions aim to prevent the targeted individuals and companies from doing business with Americans, in an effort to protect the international financial system from abuse by Hamas militants. Additionally, there were unverified rumors of Russia arming Hamas, although no concrete proof has been presented. The alleged link between the Hamas attack and Russia is still being investigated, but it highlights the complex relationships between various actors in the region. Lastly, we explored the potential of Cyprus offshore gas deposits to increase prosperity in the region and help de-escalate the conflict between Turkey and Greece over the island. However, the recent war between Israel and Hamas has put plans for cooperation on hold, and negotiations must involve Turkey, which has claimed the natural resources off the island's coast. In conclusion, the situation in the Middle East remains volatile and complex. The conflict between Israel and Hamas has far-reaching implications, not only for the region but also for international relations. There is a need for a concerted effort from the international community to push for a ceasefire and work towards a just and lasting peace. It is time to break the cycle of violence and find a diplomatic solution. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on these developments. What do you make of the situation in the Middle East? Do you have any questions for me? Let's engage in a lively discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.